Hey everyone, thought I'd make a quick video talking about what I read in July, or at least I think it'll be quicker than my usual wrap-up videos because I didn't go to any like big book events or anything or have anything like that to talk about, and I did read some really good books, but I also read one book which I think is my most disappointing read of the entire year. It's especially disappointing because I had such high expectations for it. But first I want to talk about some books that I did really love. So, I mean, there's the Water Cure by Sophie Mackintosh, which has been, I coincidentally read right before, the week before the Longlist for the Booker Prize was announced, and it was on the Booker Prize, which I was so happy to see. And, you know, some people have been talking about how it's like a feminist dystopian novel, and it seems like that's been done a lot, but honestly, this does like a really interesting twist on it, and it's not what you expect. So that's all I'm gonna say about it. It's, you know, it's been talked about a lot recently, so I think most people know the plot, basically, that it's about three sisters living on an island, and there's this sort of impending threat which you don't entirely understand, and over the course of the novel it unravels what's going on with the family and the world. And yeah, it's really fascinating and beautifully done. Also, at the beginning of the month, I went on a road trip around Scotland, which was so much fun. Like, we really lucked out with the weather because it rains almost all the time in Scotland, but we had beautiful weather almost the entire time. And the landscape we were driving up around the very north coast of Scotland. It was beautiful, like so gorgeous, just like these amazing mountains and landscapes and animals prancing everywhere. It's, you know, just, it was really like magical. And also it was so much fun because we were driving in, so did this sort of road trip, and while my boyfriend drives, I like to read aloud to him. And since we were in Scotland, I thought I would read him Muriel Spark. And so I read the entirety of her novel Momento, Mori, this beautiful new edition from Virago Press, and that Virago Press have done these 40th edition books celebrating their 40th anniversary of the publishing company, and yeah, it's really lovely, and this novel is so funny and so brilliant. I think it was only the third novel she ever wrote, and she only wrote it when she was 40, but it's about a group of old people who start to be harassed by this telephone caller, this anonymous telephone caller. They don't know who he is, who keeps calling them, and all he says is, "Remember, you must die," and then hangs up. And this just sort of sends them all into a tizzy. But the characters are so vivid and alive and hilarious in their like quirkiness. One of them has like an odd slight perversion, and others, they're just really like petulant old people who, when things go wrong for them, they threaten to change their wills, to take people out of their wills, so they're all like constantly changing their wills. And it's so, but like, it's also incredibly meaningful for the way that it's like a commentary on old life and the process of aging. Some of us never get any wiser, and so yeah, it's so well done. So I really want to read more Muriel Spark after this. And I also read Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata, and this book has been being talked about a lot recently, and it's fairly slight, quite easy to read, basically about a woman who works in a convenience store and who's incredibly socially awkward, and she finds comfort in the routine of the convenience store, and she works there almost 20 years, like basically her whole adult life, when we meet her in her late 30s. And I think Claire from Claire Reads Books already talked about this and made this comparison, because it's a very apt comparison to make. Comparing it to Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine, because sort of similarly, it's about somebody who like literally doesn't understand the dynamics of social relationships, and who just plunges into her work. Although actually the character in this, she does have some friends that she regularly sees, and she's able to sort of imitate the social norms to fit in, and she has a sister who she's quite close to, whereas in Eleanor Oliphant she was totally isolated, didn't know anybody. But this is done so much better and is much more accomplished. It just the way she handles that type of character and looks at loneliness in that way is much more powerful and striking. And I really appreciated how she takes this stance of this sort of Andy Warhol type sensibility. You know, Andy Warhol said like the most beautiful thing in like any country is McDonald's, and that's because it's just like a carbon copy, and like you know what to expect when you go into a McDonald's, and it's the same everywhere, but it's different because it's in a different country, so it's slightly different. And so in the same way she loves her convenience store, which is the same as many others in this chain of convenience stores, but it's slightly different and it's hers. But if you think about it, I mean, there is a real beauty in that it's you know what to expect, it's comfortable, and working there, it's like a routine. She knows what's expected of her. She knows she has a uniform she has to wear, so she doesn't even have to think about what she's going to wear. So all individuality is sort of stripped out, and there is like a bizarre sort of comfort in that, because, you know, in a way we all think like, you know, it's good to be individual and show who you are and your personality, but, you know, at the same time that's nerve-wracking, that there's like responsibility that goes along with it, that you know, you have to sort of think about like, well, who am I really, and how am I going to present myself, and if I'm presenting myself in a certain way, is that an affectation or is that genuinely who I am? And so it just like raises all of those questions in a really interesting way. And then I read this wonderful, big, thick novel, but it didn't feel like a very long read because it was so much fun. Swansong by Kelleigh Greenberg-Jephcott. And although this is actually a book event I went to see her read at this at Waterstone's Gower Street. They do such great book events and readings at Waterstone's Gower Street, but because of the hot weather, like not many people have been going to book readings, and so I was one of, I think, 15 people in the audience, and the events organizer there, who I know, she said that just like not that many people have been coming to events just because the weather is so nice. People don't go to sit in bookstores and talk about books. But this novel is the fictionalization of the end of the life of Truman Capote, although it really shows pieces from all of his life. And it's about a period in his life when he wrote a novel called Answered Prayers, or he started writing a novel. He didn't actually finish it. He was just writing chapters and publishing those chapters in magazines for a very high price. But it was a thinly veiled fictionalization of the lives of a lot of his high society friends who had confided in him all of their secrets, and he betrayed those secrets by telling them in these stories. And so the women who he called his swans obviously didn't react very well to this, and so it's sort of she presents their lives, and it's narrated in this collective we, talking about Truman Capote, but also it focuses on each of their individual lives and how they were so interesting in themselves. These were women who were really like directing the way society and culture was going. And a lot of them were married to very famous men and were very accomplished in themselves. But also really fascinatingly, it shows Truman Capote's relationship with Harper Lee, who he literally grew up next door to. Like, you couldn't make up how much of a coincidence that is that they grew up next to each other, and how they had a very close bond. But once Harper Lee became famous for writing her novel, they became very distanced from each other because Truman Capote sort of thought like he was the successful one, and he didn't expect her to achieve such literary fame. And it's interesting thinking how Truman Capote's relationships with other authors, because he was notoriously like felt threatened by a lot of authors and talk a lot of shit about all of them, and in particular about my favorite author, Joyce Carol Oates, who Truman Capote called a joke monster who ought to be beheaded in a public auditorium. Yeah, it's pretty extreme. And but you know, Joyce Carol Oates got the last laugh and had the last word, because several years ago she tweeted how it was ironic that she was asked to be a guest judge for a Truman Capote award when he said that she should be publicly executed, and then she just ended her tweet with LOL, and so yeah, I thought that was like a perfect like riposte, and like how she's had this long enduring career where he obviously was a bright flame that wrote these really well regarded novels, and then he, through his like excess living and becoming socially outcast, he died quite early on. But this is such an accomplished novel overall. Like what she does, I think she just brings the story of his life and the lives of these fascinating women to life so well, and it's just so much fun to read. And I also read Bitter Orange by Claire Fuller, and not going to talk about this because I made another video talking about how great I think this novel is, like especially as a summer read, because it's set like in a hot summer, and it basically involves a love triangle of these three people who are isolated on this dilapidated English estate, and over one hot summer, and the things that happen in their relationship, and also the mysteries that they uncover in this gothic type setting. It's so wonderful. But then the novel, which was such a disappointment and which I had started reading and really loved at first, was called Confessions of the Fox by Jordy Rosenberg. And this novel, this is a proof copy. This is what the final edition looks like, and it's not good. Like the cover is really odd, and I don't know why they chose this. It has almost like a sci-fi type theme to it, when actually this is a historical novel, or mainly a historical novel. It starts as a historical novel where an academic discovers this lost manuscript written by a trans person from centuries ago, and so it's like supposed to be this great artifact, and it like relates that manuscript, but at the same time the academic is making notes on this manuscript, and so there's annotations throughout it where he gives his notes about the meaning of it, and the historical story is so good and so much fun. But then the annotations start getting longer and longer and longer, and it becomes much more about the academic's story, or like half about the historical story and half about the academic story. And the historical story is about this trans man who develops a relationship with a prostitute, and they become these expert thieves who are sort of on the run and having all these wild adventures, and it's so enjoyable to read about that. And then you're like whipped out of that world by this academic who's having problems with the administration at the university, and his struggles as a trans man, because the academic is also a trans man. But so like I see how he's sort of relating the present with the past, but it didn't need to be done, I didn't think. I just really wanted the historical story, or it could have been two separate novels. So, you know, it just started getting too frustrating to read, and I read about half of it, and I had that thing where I found like I didn't want to go back to reading because it was getting to be like a bit of a slog, and so that's always my big indication that I should DNF this, because it probably won't get any better, and you know, maybe someday I could try it again, but not now. So that was my reading month of July. Let me know what you've been reading, or if you've read any of these books and what you think about them. And if you want to know more of my thoughts about any of them, I'll put links to my full reviews below. But I hope you're doing well, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye guys.